Ever get that feeling? Like you're swimming in articles, research papers, the whole internet, really. And still, you just don't get it.
That's where we come in,
Here on the deep dives, we do the waiting for you
cutting through all that noise.
to bring you the good stuff, the core insights, the stuff that actually matters.
Today, we're going deep on creativity.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
We've got a whole collection of writings we're pulling from called Creative License, The Art of Gestalt Therapy.
What's so cool about these sources is they tackle creativity from every angle imaginable.
The neurology of it, the role it plays in therapy and relationships.
Even how creativity shows up in those everyday moments.
Think of this as your crash course in creativity, Gestalt style.
We're cutting through the jargon to bring you those aha moments.
The surprising facts, the practical insights that'll actually stick with you.
We've got theoretical stuff, observations from therapy sessions, even some neuroscience sprinkled in.
And our mission.
To break down how Gestalt therapy views creativity.
Because it's not just about art.
No, not at all.
It's a much bigger part of how we live, how we connect, even how we heal.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. This idea of creative adjustment really jumped out at me.
Ah, yes, creative adjustment.
It's like creativity isn't just for artists, right?
Yeah.
It's how we all interact with the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every time you solve a problem at work,
Or navigate a tricky situation with a friend or family member.
you're not just adjusting.
You're creating a solution.
It's creativity in action.
And from what I gathered, even the very concept of Gestalt has roots in aesthetics.
Absolutely. It's all about this search for good form.
Not just in art, but in our behavior, how we express our emotions.
So when they talk about good form, what do they really mean?
Well, think of it as an expression or a way of being that just feels right for the situation.
Especially in those moments when we're connecting with others?
It's that feeling of completeness, wholeness, where what you feel inside matches how you express yourself outwardly. Okay, so if we look at the founders, the pioneers of Gestalt therapy, what were some of their key ideas about creativity? What were the elements they really focused on?
Well, there are a few big ones. First, as we mentioned, that whole idea of looking at Gestalt itself as an aesthetic concept.
Right.
Then there's this constant striving for good form, finding that perfect fit between our inner experience and our outward expression.
And importantly, it's about finding your own way of being, right?
Yeah.
Not trying to squeeze yourself into someone else's mold.
Absolutely. It's embracing your individuality. And then you've got this ability to transform, to take what's familiar and rearrange it into something new.
And of course, you need that willingness to experiment, to step outside of your comfort zone and try new things.
Now, beyond just these ideas, Gestalt therapy also uses some very practical techniques to actually enhance creativity.
Oh yeah, these are fascinating. What were some of those?
Well, one is alternating between verbal and nonverbal expression.
So like, if you're talking about a feeling, you might also draw it or even act it out physically.
Exactly. And then there's using both your dominant and non-dominant hands for things like drawing or writing.
I remember trying that. It felt so awkward at first.
But it can sometimes tap into different parts of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Unlock new ways of experiencing things.
Yeah, exactly.
Another technique is creating that play space in therapy.
I love that idea. A space where you can experiment without judgment.
Exactly. A safe space to try new behaviors, to play out fantasies, to really explore.
It takes the pressure off.
And speaking of play, Gestalt therapy really sees a connection between how creativity works and how the therapeutic process unfolds.
Oh, how so?
Well, just like in any creative process, therapy often involves going through a period of chaos, of things feeling messy and disorganized.
Before they can come together in a new way.
Precisely. It's that chaos before reorganization. And then there's this focus on integrating our polarities.
What do they mean by polarities?
Those seemingly opposite parts of ourselves. You know, the part that wants to be alone versus the part that craves connection. Gestalt therapy encourages us to work with those opposing forces, to bring them together rather than trying to eliminate one or the other.
Makes sense.
And finally, there's this really interesting idea of translating experiences between sensory modalities.
Sensory modalities, so
like dancing a dream or painting a feeling.
Ah, I see.
It's about using different senses to access and understand an experience.
Okay, that makes sense. And ultimately, it seems like the goal is to bring something new into the foreground, to allow for new configurations to emerge.
Exactly. It's about shaking things up, shifting our perspective.
To see things in a new light.
And there's that great quote from Arnheim that really captures this. Information, means to give form.
So when we bring something new into our awareness, we're essentially shaping it, giving it form.
And that allows for new connections and insights to emerge.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about this idea of implicit and explicit knowledge. This comes from Daniel Stern's work, right? What's the difference between those two?
Right, so explicit knowledge is the stuff we can easily put into words.
Facts, figures, things we can explain.
Exactly. Implicit knowledge, though, is more nonverbal. It's like that gut feeling, that intuition.
It's knowing how to ride a bike, but not being able to explain every tiny balance adjustment you make.
Ah, okay.
Or think about comforting a friend who's upset.
You just do it. You don't really think about it.
Exactly. It's your implicit knowledge of human connection guiding your actions.
Fascinating. And where do mirror neurons fit into all of this?
Mirror neurons are key players in how we connect with others at a very deep implicit level. They're these brain cells that fire both when we do something.
And when we watch someone else do the same thing.
Right. It's like our brains are running a simulation of what the other person is experiencing.
Wow, that's wild. It's like we're built to understand each other on this really basic level. And this ties into Steinbratten's concept of other-centered participation.
Which basically means
Being able to see the world from someone else's point of view.
to step into their shoes, so to speak.
Exactly. It's a fundamental part of being human.
And then, after these moments of connection, of meeting, as they call it,
There's this phase of being alone but together,
right,
this period of withdrawal.
where we kind of process the experience.
Exactly. It's not necessarily about being physically alone, but more about an internal shift,
An open space, as they call it.
where we assimilate what just happened.
I remember the sources mentioning that Gestalt therapy really emphasizes the here and now.
Mm.
Why is that present moment focus so important?
Well, for one, most therapies agree that what happens in the present moment tends to have a stronger impact.
It's more real, more immediate.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is, even memories or things we're anticipating in the future.
We actually experience those in the present moment, too.
Right, there's no escaping the now.
And Gestalt therapy's roots in phenomenology really support that focus.
Absolutely. It's all about our direct experience of the world.
So how does this figure-ground dynamic in Gestalt therapy play into this whole idea of implicit and explicit knowledge?
Well, figure ground is all about what's in our awareness in a given moment.
The figure is what we're focused on.
And the ground is everything else. And what's interesting is,
Culturally, we tend to privilege the verbal, the explicit.
right, but in therapy, there's a constant interplay between what becomes figure and what fades into the background. Sometimes it's helpful to bring those unconscious patterns into the light to make them explicit.
But it's not the only way change happens.
No, not at all. And that actually connects back to what Freud was discovering early on.
That simply making the unconscious conscious isn't always enough.
Exactly. It's the relationship itself, the connection between the therapist and the patient that holds so much power.
So if the relationship is so crucial, is it all about making the unconscious aspects of that relationship conscious?
That's a great question. And I think it gets at this idea of the other side of the moon that Stern talks about.
Right, those implicit aspects of the relationship, the stuff that's happening beneath the surface.
Exactly. And that's where this concept of therapeutic meeting as improvisational co-creation comes in.
Ah, yes. So what does that actually involve? What does it look like in practice?
It's about being present and responsive to each other in the moment.
Without getting stuck in rigid roles or expectations?
Right. It's about letting go of those preconceived notions and allowing the authentic selfing process to unfold.
It's almost like a dance, right? With these small, intricate movements that emerge organically.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And just like a dance, this therapeutic interaction unfolds over time.
Right, there's that time dimension. And the sources talk about how this cycle of contact and withdrawal influences how we experience ourselves in connection with others.
So how does that time element play a role?
Well, it's like each phase in that cycle, that reaching out and then pulling back.
Contact and withdrawal.
Right. Each phase might have a different feel to it, a different tendency. And those subtle shifts over time, they give meaning to how we're experiencing ourselves in that interaction. It's like a pulling toward movement in a dance. That same movement could mean something completely different depending on where it falls in the sequence.
Ah, I see. So it's not just about the movement itself, but about its place in the overall flow.
Exactly. And in therapy, every communication, every gesture, every word, it takes on added meaning because of where it falls in that timeline of the session.
Fascinating. Now, what about those times when a therapist offers support at just the right moment and a relational block dissolves, what's actually happening there in terms of our ability to be spontaneous and to change?
Well, in Gestalt therapy, it's seen as regaining our natural spontaneity.
So we become more free in how we're interacting, at least within that therapeutic relationship.
Exactly. And someone like Daniel Stern might describe it as our implicit relational knowledge expanding. So it's a shift in how we understand being with another person,
But it's happening on a more unconscious level.
right? And both perspectives kind of point to this idea of relearning a skill, like relearning how to ride a bike. And that new skill, that newfound ability, it can then ripple out into other areas of our lives.
Now, the sources also mention Malcolm Parlett and his 5 creative abilities.
Right, those adaptive responses to life. What were those again?
There's responding, interrelating, self-recognizing, experimenting, and knowing.
Okay, break those down for me. What do each of those actually mean?
So responding is about how we meet the world around us. It's about how we organize ourselves in the face of challenges and opportunities.
Okay.
Interrelating is all about the art of connecting with others.
So how we build and maintain relationships.
Exactly. Self-recognizing is our capacity to be aware of our own internal experience.
Our thoughts, feelings, needs.
Right. Experimenting isn't just about trying new things, but also about consciously choosing. Sometimes that might mean choosing a familiar path, but for a new reason.
Interesting. And what about knowing?
Knowing is about integration. It's taking all of our experiences and weaving them into a cohesive understanding of ourselves and the world.
I like that. It's like making meaning out of our lives.
Exactly. And Parlett really emphasizes that developing these creative abilities is a process.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And that brings us to this idea that creativity doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
Right. It's always connected to this wider phenomenological field.
So our creative expression is always in dialogue with the world around us.
The environment, the people we interact with.
And those things can be both limiting and enabling.
They can hold us back, but they can also inspire us.
Exactly. And even in our closest relationships, there's this constant dance between individual expression and the needs of the relationship.
It's about respecting each other's differences.
And using those differences to create something new and exciting.
And I really like how the sources emphasize that creative adjustment is a holistic process. Like, creative isn't just describing the adjustment, it's an essential part of it.
Yes, that's a crucial point. Creativity isn't something we add on top of adapting. It's woven right into the fabric of how we adapt.
Let's talk about this connection between aesthetics and neuroscience. The sources talk about Gestalt therapies, Weltanschauung.
Weltanschauung. It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. What does it mean again?
It basically means their worldview, their overall perspective on life.
Okay. And in Gestalt therapy, that worldview sees life itself as a creative process. How do aesthetics fit into that?
Well, they believe that the aesthetic qualities of an experience, things like harmony, grace, rhythm.
Those are actually indicators of how healthy our relationship is with the environment.
Exactly. When our interactions feel vibrant and alive.
It reflects a state of balance and well-being.
And this is actually one of the reasons why it's been so challenging to develop a traditional theory of psychopathology within Gestalt therapy.
Oh, why is that?
Well, because if healthy functioning is defined by these creative responses,
Then a rigid system of classifying mental illness risks limiting that very creativity.
exactly, it's a bit of a paradox.
It's a kind of trying to put creativity in a box.
Right. Gestalt therapy is more about looking at the individual's unique way of being in the world.
And trusting that.
Yeah,
There's an inherent wisdom in the organism.
exactly. They emphasize organismic self-regulation, this idea that,
But we have an innate ability to heal and find balance.
and so the way they view contacting,
Our aware experience of life.
it's seen as us, as organisms, acting like artists.
Shaping raw sensations into meaningful forms.
And that's where neuroscience comes in. Because even in the brain, we see this diversity in how people think and process information.
Right, some people are more verbal,
Others are more visual.
and some are more kinesthetic, more about movement.
Exactly. And neuroscience shows us that these different ways of thinking are reflected in how our brains function.
So walk me through this. How does creativity actually play out in the brain?
Well, think of your brain as this incredibly complex computer.
With all these different systems working together.
Right. You've got
Yeah.
sensory systems,
Sight, sound, touch.
planning systems for organizing our actions.
And emotional systems for evaluating what's important.
And all of these systems are constantly interacting, processing information, making decisions.
It's like a symphony orchestra. with all these different instruments playing together.
That's a great analogy. And creativity emerges from this intricate interplay of brain systems.
So it's not just about one part of the brain lighting up.
No, it's a much more holistic process.
And it's important to remember that creativity isn't just for artists or geniuses.
Right. It's a property of everyday life.
The sources give examples like,
The Cuban auto mechanic who comes up with ingenious solutions to fix cars.
or the local priest who finds creative ways to connect with their community,
Exactly. Creativity is fundamentally about,
meeting our needs and adapting to our environment.
and the social environment plays a big role too, right?
Oh, absolutely. They talk about Teresa Amabiel's research on this.
So how does the world around us shape our creative abilities?
Well, Amabiel's work highlights how our skills, our motivation, our general thinking processes,
All of those are important for creativity.
but those things can be nurtured or stifled by our social environment,
And some environments are fertile ground for creativity.
while others, not so much.
And the field's perspective, which draws on Vygotsky and Luria, takes this even further.
Okay, how so?
It suggests that the very neural circuits in our brains that support creativity, those are actually shaped by our interactions with the world.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So the way we connect with others, the experiences we have.
They actually influence how our brains are wired for creativity.
Precisely.
And then there's this idea of expert systems developing in creative individuals. What's that all about?
Well, people who are highly creative in a particular domain.
Like a specific field of study or a type of art?
Right, they often develop this deep familiarity with that area.
They become experts.
Exactly. And this allows them to see patterns and make connections that someone who's new to that field might miss.
So it's like they've built up this vast library of knowledge and experience in their brains,
And they can access it quickly and effortlessly.
which gives them a huge advantage when it comes to generating new ideas and solving problems creatively.
Right. And they often have a highly developed working memory, which allows them to hold a lot of information in mind at once.
Which is crucial for making those connections and seeing those patterns.
Absolutely. And the example they give of John Irving, the novelist who has dyslexia, is a great illustration of this.
Because it shows that creativity isn't about having a super high IQ.
Exactly. It's more about that deep engagement with a particular domain and the ability to see things in a new light.
Now let's dive into how all of this relates to therapy and relationships. One of the things that really stood out to me was how Gestalt therapy views dreams.
Oh, yes, the dream work.
They see dreams as
Creative works of art,
made by the dreamer.
where the dreamer is the artist, the sculptor, the storyteller.
It's really empowering, isn't it?
It puts the dreamer in the driver's seat.
And it emphasizes this sense of integration, like all the different parts of the dream.
They come together to create a meaningful whole.
Right. And they use this phrase, integration and aesthetic sense of facet.
Which roughly translates to the doing makes it,
So it's about the process of creating the dream.
and the aesthetic qualities of that creation.
The way it feels, the images, the emotions, all of it.
The sources also talk about the historical context of Gestalt therapy
Right. Its beginnings at Fritz Perls' Brownstone.
and how that setting itself reflected the connection between creativity and therapy.
So Perls had his own paintings there.
He
huh?
did, and they often reflected psychoanalytic themes.
It's like he was using art to work through his own ideas.
And Lore Perls, Fritz's wife, had a musical background.
So that creative energy was woven into the very fabric of their lives.
And there were also political aspects to Gestalt therapy, weren't there?
Yeah, they mentioned Paul Goodman.
Goodwin was an activist. He was very vocal against the war.
And he had this approach of tinkering, right?
Right. Addressing problems in a very practical, hands-on way.
Kind of like making small adjustments and seeing what happens.
Exactly. And he saw this as a parallel to the therapeutic process.
Making those small interventions, those creative experiments.
And seeing how they ripple out and create change.
There's also a lot of emphasis on this concept of creative indifference. This was from Salomo Friedlander, right?
Yes. And it was incredibly influential for Perls.
So what is creative indifference?
It's basically about holding those opposing forces within ourselves.
Those polarities we talked about earlier.
Instead of trying to resolve them or choose one over the other.
Okay, so like
If you're feeling both angry and sad at the same time,
you acknowledge both of those feelings.
you hold them both. You don't try to force yourself to feel just one way.
Interesting. And they connect this to Perl's 5-layer theory of personality.
Exactly. Creative indifference is woven into the very fabric of Gestalt therapy.
They also mention Otto Rank's perspective on this.
Ah, yes, rank. He had some very strong opinions about the role of the therapist.
What was his view?
He believed that therapists should avoid having this excessive creative act,
Excessive creative act, meaning,
being overly helpful, trying to impose their own vision or solutions on the patient. He called this the Prometheus complex.
so he didn't see the therapist as the artist,
No. Instead, he used the metaphor of a midwife.
helping the patient bring forth their own creation.
Exactly. And that actually relates to how the sources discuss the concept of art itself.
Oh, how so?
They broaden it beyond just beauty.
Right. Art isn't just about pretty pictures or pleasing sounds.
It encompasses a much wider range of human experiences.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
Exactly. And it's not always aligned with our moral or political beliefs.
It can be challenging, provocative, even disturbing.
Right. And its meaning can change over time. It's not static.
The sources also touch on humor and shared memories.
Ah, yes. They talk about how those can be powerful tools for connection and healing.
They share that anecdote about Zinker and his father.
Right, where a shared memory and a bit of humor.
Led to this really profound moment of connection.
And it all happened very spontaneously.
It's a great example of how creativity isn't just about grand gestures.
It can show up in these small, unexpected moments.
They also talk about improvisation and how it's often limited in our daily lives because, well, we need efficiency.
Right. We have schedules to keep, routines to follow.
But in therapy, improvisation can be really valuable. Why is that?
Because it can help us break free from those rigid patterns.
And see things in a new light.
Exactly. It can reveal new ways of experiencing the world.
They give the example of.
The depressed young man who was asked to act out how he felt in his body.
And through that improvisation,
He was able to access and express his emotions in a way that talking alone couldn't achieve.
it's like sometimes we need to bypass the intellect and go straight to the body.
Right. And they also talk about beauty and creativity in relationships.
This was a fascinating part. What are those contextual qualities that make a relationship feel beautiful and creative?
It's about emotional investment, the joy of supporting each other.
And the richness that comes from allowing each person to express their unique self.
It's about fulfilling that deep human need for connection and belonging.
They also list some key capacities for thriving relationships. What are those?
Let's see. Maintaining a sense of separateness while also influencing each other.
Having accurate empathy,
Cultivating curiosity.
commitment to the relationship, persistence.
And finding that balance between protecting each other and allowing for individual autonomy.
Right. And they even contrast Fritz and Laura Pearl's different perspectives on commitment.
Oh, yes. That was interesting.
So what were their takes on it?
For Fritz, commitment was about being fully present in each moment.
Living in the now.
Exactly.
Right.
For Laura, though, it was more about,
Accepting the limitations and creatively using what's available.
they give the example of that story, the woman in the dunes.
Right. Where the main character has to adapt to a very challenging situation.
And they also talk about the dedication and struggles of creative individuals like Cézanne and Miles Davis.
Whose lives were often filled with.
Inner turmoil.
Right. But also this incredible drive to express their unique vision.
They show us that the creative process isn't always easy or glamorous,
There's often a lot of pain and struggle involved.
but it's driven by this deep need to bring something new into the world,
And they share that powerful quote from D.H. Lawrence.
about not wanting others to be fixed.
And how new beings emerge with change.
It speaks to this idea that relationships, like individuals, are constantly evolving,
And we need to embrace that change, that fluidity.
rather than clinging to rigid expectations,
They also introduce Wheeler's diagram of the experiential field,
which highlights
the boundary between our inner and outer worlds.
and this third space.
Right. What's the significance of that third space for creativity,
Well, it's this in-between area
where we can try out new ideas and narratives?
without the immediate consequences of the real world.
So it's like a safe space for experimentation.
Exactly. And protecting that boundary is crucial for creativity to flourish.
Because it allows us to take risks without fear of failure.
Right. And they talk about how shame can actually constrict that creative space.
So how does shame get in the way?
Well, unlike resistance, which can sometimes fuel creativity.
Shame works by undermining us. It makes us feel like our inner experiences aren't valid.
Like we're not worthy of being seen.
And that shrinks our creative energy,
Exactly. So how do we nurture and expand this creative zone?
especially when shame is present
Well, it involves addressing shame in both our inner world
and in our interactions with others,
So creating a more supportive environment.
where we feel safe to express ourselves.
Exactly. And finding those reference groups of support.
People who see us and validate our experiences.
And sometimes the therapist becomes that validating presence initially.
Holding that space for the client to explore and create.
And even with all of this understanding, they acknowledge that there's still a mystery to creativity.
Right. There's this alchemy to it.
Exactly. We can break down all the elements, all the contributing
Is
factors.
there still something magical about how those things come together to create something new?
It's that spark of the unknown.
It's life itself.
Right.
Okay, part 6 of our deep dive gets into how we embody creativity and how this all applies to therapy. They start with this really detailed observation of a baby.
Playing with a chain.
Right. What can we learn about embodied creativity from watching a baby play?
Well, this 4.5-month-old infant, they describe how she moves from simply grasping the chain and